I never learned to say her name right. Not all the way right, not with the particular sound that lived in the middle of it, the one that required a kind of attention I hadn't been taught to give to sounds. She corrected me every time I tried. Every time, I was glad she did. It meant she was still there, and still willing. The first time was in April. I was at the creek filling barrels for the Dutton ranch, 2 miles downstream from the main pasture, where the water ran cleaner than the trough near the barn. The Dutton place ran 300 head on high grass between the Uncompahgre River and the foothills, and I had been working it since the previous October, long enough to know the cattle and the fence line and the foreman's temper and the particular mud of the creek, crossing in early spring, and not quite long enough to call it home. I had not called anywhere home since Missouri. That was by arrangement, mostly mine, that it was the kind of work that goes faster if you don't think about it too hard. And I had gotten good at not thinking about most things too hard by then. I was 27 years old and had been working ranches since I was 19. Moving from Kansas to Nebraska to Colorado in the way that a man moves when he is trying to stay ahead of something he doesn't have the language to name. I knew the names of the things I was good at. I did not know the name of the thing I was running from, or I did know it and called it by other names: restlessness, wanderlust, the natural inclination of a young man to see what's over the next ridge. I had been calling it those things for 2 years. The name underneath them was Thomas, but that morning in April I was thinking about water barrels, which is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps a man functional, and I was not thinking about my brother. And I was not thinking about Missouri. She was on the east bank when I looked up. I don't know how long she'd been there. Still, watching my horse, Pen, a gray gelding with strong opinions about water, with the patient assessment of someone who had identified a problem and was working out the approach. Pen was favoring his near forefoot. I straightened. She looked at me without alarm, which I noticed because most people alone at a remote creek in Colorado in 1879 had some alarm available. The territory had been unsettled since the previous spring, land being surveyed, lines being redrawn, people moving who hadn't planned to move, and remote creek crossings were not generally places where strangers looked at each other with the particular calm she had. She didn't look alarmed. She looked like someone who had been at this creek longer than I had and was waiting to see what I would do with that information. "Your horse has a stone," she said. In English. Clean English, unaccented, better than most of the men I worked with. "I see that," I said. This was not entirely true. I hadn't noticed until she said it. "Do you have a pick?" I did. I got it from the saddlebag and worked the stone free while she watched from the bank with the focused attention of someone assessing whether you know what you're doing. When I finished, Pen stood evenly. I looked up at her. "Thank you," I said, though she hadn't done anything except see what I'd missed. "You would have noticed eventually," she said. Not unkind. Just precise, the way a person is precise when they say what's true, and don't trouble themselves to make it softer. I said I reckoned. That was probably so. She turned and walked back through the cottonwoods on the east bank and was gone. I loaded the barrels and headed back to the ranch. That night, I thought about the encounter once. which was once more than I usually thought about anything that happened at a creek, and I did not examine that fact. And I went to sleep. I came back in June, not to the exact spot, not deliberately, or so I told myself on the ride down. The barrels always needed filling. That was the reason. I held it in front of me the whole 2 miles. She was on the east bank again, crouched near the water's edge, gathering something from the bank with careful hands. She didn't look up when she heard Penn and me on the road above, which meant she had heard us before I would have heard myself. She finished what she was doing first. "Yarrow," she said, to the question I hadn't asked yet. She held up a handful of the white-flowered stalks. "For fever. My cousin's children have been sick since last month." I led Penn to the water. "Does it help?" "More reliably than most things the agency doctor offers." She straightened and looked at me with those dark, direct eyes. "You came back." "Barrels," I said. She looked at the barrels on the mule. She looked at me. She said nothing else, which was, somehow, worse than if she had said something. I asked her name. She told me. It had sounds in it I could hear, and one I couldn't isolate, somewhere between the second and third syllable, a note that lived in a part of the mouth I hadn't learned to use for language. I tried it 3 times. The third time she tilted her head slightly, which was the closest she came, in those early months, to a smile. "Close," she said. "The middle part." I tried again. She shook her head with the patience of someone who has corrected this before and expects to correct it again and has made her peace with the repetition. "Mady," she said. "You can call me that. It's what my father called me. Where is your father?" A pause. "He died in 74. She went back to gathering the yarrow, her hands efficient and practiced. "He worked as a scout for the army. He's the reason I speak like this." I told her my name. Jessie Kane. She said it once, correctly, on the first attempt, with no particular effort, which seemed about right given the general arithmetic of the situation. We talked for an hour, maybe more. About the creek mostly, where it came from, how it ran in the different seasons, which banks caught the afternoon sun and which stayed cold all day. She knew this water the way I knew fence line, completely, without having to think about it. She knew the names of the plants on the banks and what they were for, which stretch ran muddy in spring and which ran clear, where the best crossing was in a dry year and where it moved in a wet one. She talked about these things the way a person talks about something that belongs to them, not proudly, just with the particular ease of ownership. I rode back to the ranch, filled the barrels, unsaddled Penn, and sat on the bunkhouse steps for a while, watching the last of the evening come down over the pasture. I didn't tell anyone where I'd been, specifically. There was nothing to tell and nothing to hide. But I kept the 2 things separate from each other anyway. And I did not examine why September came in dry and gold. The aspens turning on the upper slopes and the creek running lower than it had in July. I had been going back on various pretexts since June. The barrels. A fence line check in that section, Penn needing water away from the main trough, which was true in the sense that all horses need water and false in the sense that the trough was perfectly good. The pretexts had gotten thinner as summer went on. I kept making them because they were easier than the alternative, which was to say plainly that the creek had become the part of my week I looked forward to most. and that I did not know how to hold that information without the frame of the barrels around it. She was there, sitting on the flat rock at the water's edge on the east bank. Something was different, not in her posture, which was the same careful stillness it always was, but in the air around her. The quality a person carries when something is pressing on them from the inside, and they are holding their shape despite it. I crossed to the east bank. I had never done that before, always stayed on the western side, the ranch side, the side that gave us both a line between us that neither of us had to acknowledge. I crossed it that morning without fully deciding to. The way you do something your body has decided before your mind gets the message. And I sat down on the flat rock 2 feet from her and looked at the creek. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. After a long while she said, "They moved the camp south last month, closer to the Gunnison River." I waited. "More soldiers than there were last year," she said. "The lines are getting tighter." I had heard things at the ranch. Trouble up at White River. The agency, the agent named Meeker. What had happened there in late September? The soldiers that had come after. I had kept it at the distance that ranch work makes available, the distance of a man who has enough to attend to in the immediate foreground. It was not distant now. It was on this flat rock, 2 feet from me, with this woman who had gathered yarrow for a sick cousin in June, and who was now telling me the camp had moved and the lines were tighter, and doing it in the same careful, precise voice she used for everything. "Are you?" I started. "I'm here," she said, not interrupting. Answering the question I hadn't finished, we sat for a long time. The creek moved past us, indifferent and reliable. She pointed out a Huron working the north bend. It had been coming to that precise spot every morning for 3 years. She said she knew this because she'd been watching. I thought about what it meant to watch a bird for 3 years. To be somewhere steady enough that a Huron's patterns became part of the texture of your days. I had not been steady anywhere for 2 years. The last place I'd been steady was Missouri, and the last morning I'd been steady, there was the morning before Thomas. I had something in my chest that wanted to come out, a fact about myself, the kind you give a person when you want them to understand something you haven't said yet. I held it for a while. Then from the road above the tree line came the sound of riders, 2 or 3 of them on the North Ranch Road, and I was on my feet before I had decided to stand. And when I looked back across the water, she was already on her feet on the other side, the blanket around her shoulders again. The space between us re-established as if it had never been reduced. We looked at each other across the creek. The riders moved north and faded. "Same time," she said. "The way you say something that has already been decided." "Same time," I said. I went back to the ranch and lay in my bunk that night and thought about what I had held in my chest and hadn't said. I thought about how the moment had passed through without arriving. I thought about my brother, which I always thought about eventually, and I let myself think about him for longer than I usually did. And then I put out the lamp and went to sleep. And in the morning I got up and worked the cattle and did not go to the creek. December came down hard on the high country. 3 weeks of cold that cracked the water lines and pushed the cattle to the near pasture and made the mornings a negotiation between what needed doing and what the body was willing to do in that temperature. I worked through it because work was what I had. And in the evenings in the bunkhouse, I sat with the other men around the stove and listened to them talk about places they were going to get back to, towns, women, family, and I noticed that that I did not have a place in that category. I had Missouri, which was behind me, and the Dutton Ranch, which was the present, and nothing after that dot. And then there was the creek, which was not a place exactly. It was more like a direction. I went in the first week of December because I had been afraid to go. And the longer I'd stayed afraid, the worse the weight of it had gotten. And I had learned enough about myself by then to know that there was only one thing to do with a weight like that. You walked toward it. She was there. I stood on the west bank and looked at her sitting on the flat rock in the gray light, the wool blanket close around her shoulders, and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't known was unsettled until that moment. The particular relief of a fear that doesn't come true, which is different from happiness but is related to it. The creek ran slow between us, not frozen yet but getting there. Thin new ice at the edges, and the deep water dark and deliberate below. She looked at me across the water. "You thought I'd be gone," she said. "I wasn't certain," I said. The honest version would have been afraid, but uncertain was close enough. "My family is further south now," she said. "But I'm still here." I crossed the creek. The water came up past the ankle, and the cold of it pushed the air out of my chest for a moment, short and sharp. I sat on the flat rock beside her. Without asking, and without making a moment of it, she pulled one edge of the blanket over my near shoulder. And we sat there in the December cold with the shared warmth and the creek moving past us and the water barrels not mentioned. Because the barrels were frozen, and we both knew it, and neither of us had been going to say it anyway. "Tell me about your brother," she said. I looked at her. In June, I had mentioned Thomas once, one sentence, an accident, the kind of thing that slips out when you're talking to someone who listens the way she listened. She had put it away and waited dot, so I told her. The fence line in question, the dispute that had gone on since our father's time. The argument that should have ended in a surveyor's office and ended instead in a late November. Mourning and a rifle and everything that came after. The moving and not stopping. The way grief works when you keep ahead of it. It doesn't leave. It just waits at whatever address you gave it last. And when you finally slow down, it finds you anyway. 2 years of slowing down, incrementally. Without quite letting myself stop, she listened the way she always listened, completely. Without preparing her response while I was still talking. When I finished, she said, "My father died in service to an army that sent a form letter to the agency and misspelled his name in it." She looked at the water. I spent 2 years after that living between things. My mother's family in the south, the edges of the settlements near here. Neither place wanted a woman who moved between the two. A pause. Then I came back to the creek. "You said found it again," I said. "What did you mean?" "I grew up near here. After my father died, I went south with my mother's people for a time. Coming back to this water felt like..." She stopped, considered. "Like something I had been given permission to do, finally." I thought about that. Permission. The things you give yourself permission to want. And how long it takes to get there. "I haven't gone back to Missouri," I said. "Where Thomas is buried. Do you need to?" The question was direct and without judgment, the way all her questions were. I thought about it honestly. Not to stand at a grave, I said. Maybe to be in the place where things were still true, before they weren't. To stand there and let them have been true and then come away from it. She nodded once, the way she nodded when something was clear and didn't require elaboration. Then she said, then go. And come back. Come back. She said it the way she said everything that mattered, directly, without softening it, as if it were already decided and only needed stating out loud to become real. I sat with that for a while. The creek moved past us. The Huron's Rock on the north bend was empty and snow-dusted, waiting for a warmer season. I've never stayed anywhere long enough to come back to it, I said. She looked at me in the December cold. You've been coming back here since April, she said. That was all she said. She didn't press it. She let it sit where she'd placed it and waited for me to pick it up, which was what she always did, and which was why, I understood later, I had always found my way back. I went back to the ranch that evening. In the morning, I told the Dutton foreman I'd need 2 weeks in the spring. Missouri, I said. Something to go back to. He wrote it in the ledger without asking further. January and February. I worked the cattle and the fence and the cold mornings the same way I always had. And it was the same work, and I was not entirely the same person doing it. The bunkhouse was the bunkhouse. The cattle were the cattle. But there was a creek 2 miles downstream that had my name on it, which was a new way to hold a piece of geography. I had never had a place with my name on it. I had been the kind of man other people's places had in. Passing, the snow pulled back from. The south pasture in March, the creek would run. Clear by April. I rode down on the last Sunday of March. She was already on the flat rock. She had a tin cup of something hot, and when I sat beside her, she handed it to me without asking. I drank. It tasted like something from a plant I didn't know yet, and I thought that was probably all right. There were things still to learn. There would be time, if we made time, if we chose the making of it. Will you be here in spring? I asked. I knew it was spring. The cottonwoods on the north bank were showing the first pale green of bud. The water was clear and moving with the particular sound it had in the good months. But some questions need to be said out loud to become real. And this was one of them. This was the question under all the other questions I had been asking at this creek since April. Finally arrived at its actual shape, she looked at the water. She looked at the north bank, at the cottonwoods, at the flat rock on the bend where the Huron would come back when the weather turned another week or 2. Then she looked at me. Yes, she said. I rode back to the Dutton ranch and put pen away and started counting the days to Missouri and the days after Missouri. I had booked the return passage before I booked the departure, which was, as far as I could tell, the first time in 2 years I had planned a return before leaving. I had somewhere to come back to. It had taken me 8 months and 4 seasons to understand what that meant, and I was still not entirely sure I had the full measure of it. You don't always know when the drifting ends. Sometimes you only know looking back when enough distance has accumulated that the shape of the thing becomes visible. But it ends. And sometimes it ends at a creek in Colorado in the sound of water over cold rock. In the particular patience of a woman who let you arrive at your own speed and asked you nothing you weren't ready for, and said yes the way she said everything that mattered, directly, without ceremony. as if it had always been true and only needed to be stated. The cottonwoods came into leaf. The Huron came back to the North Bend for its 4th year. The creek ran clear. I went back in May, the way I had said I would. She was there. The way she had said she would be. That was how it started. Or rather, that was how I finally understood it had been starting all along. Since April, since the stone in Pen's hoof. Since she had said your horse has a stone, with the quiet certainty of someone who had been paying attention long before I arrived. I never learned to say her name right. She corrected me until the last evening of that year, and corrected me again the morning after, patient as the creek, as faithful as the Huron on the North Bend. I was glad every time. It meant I was still there. It meant she was too.